Okay, I just got an overload of BS from legacy media this last week, and I've been doing these YouTube videos, and they've been well received for the most part. And I thought, what? It's time to expand into one, maybe a new series. We'll see. Where I'm going to take some time. I'm usually on the road all day, but I'll take some time out and cut through the BS. Part of my job, in writing for other publications, is that I'm always listening to, reading, or watching news. And then I got to sift through the BS from the legacy media and try and figure out the truth within it. And that's what everybody else has to do too. So I'm going to spare you the trouble. I'll give you the headlines of the week. And yes, my interpretation of them to save you from having to worry about interpreting those things. So let me go through what's happening this week. And I might even turn this into a daily thing. There's always daily news going on. You want a good source of news? Go to the Western Standard. That's got a real newsroom. That's got a real news editor. And that doesn't give you the kind of BS like I'll be going through. Well, these are real issues. You just get a BS interpretation from the legacy media. So this one, the stabbing rampage in northern Manitoba, sounds really familiar, doesn't it? It was Saskatchewan recently where there was another stabbing rampage on a reserve. These reserves are socially dysfunctional nightmares within Canada. Nobody likes to admit it. Nobody likes to call it out. Nobody likes to point out that they are just total social failures, and that citizens themselves in these reserves are suffering. This fella, 26 years old, stabbed his sister to death. She was 18, and then he harmed 8 other people before getting killed in a head-on collision with police officers trying to chase him down. And lo and behold, here's the shocker. He was out on bail. Of course he was. He was known to police. Violent, but they let him out. Look up Gladue principles if you like, to wonder part of why we keep hearing of this with particularly Indigenous offenders. It's policy is race-based policy. It says you have to give lighter sentences to Native offenders. And that's typically what applies when guys like this get out. And the price leads to death in this case. And speaking of a mess, not far from there. So that was the Hollow Water Reserve north of Winnipeg a few hours. Somewhere in that similar area, there's the Blood Vein Reserve. And the legacy media sure isn't talking about this much. Their members are illegally blocking non-native citizens from Crown land north of there. Yeah, the Western Standard covered that. Not much in legacy media. They've decided that traditional lands are all theirs. They have the right to put up no trespassing signs and ban people based on race from accessing parts of the land north of their reserve. They have no right to do that. It is absolutely illegal. No citizen should be able to do that. But guess what? Nobody's doing a thing about it. They're letting these guys get away with illegally banning citizens from their own land. And you know what's going to come next? They're going to make a full claim for it. That's what they're doing. They're setting the groundwork for it. Just like in the parks in BC, where they've handed over park access to only certain races. Where have we gone? Didn't Martin Luther King fight to end segregation with races? And then we're all the way back to step one. But this is where we are. Now, let me get on to what really got me with the BS news this week, though. And that's, you've probably heard, no matter where you are in Canada, the fake book ban going on in Alberta. For those not familiar, I'll give a quick rundown. Pornographic images of men performing oral sex upon each other were found on library bookshelves in dozens of Alberta schools, many of them kindergarten to grade 9. Parents were furious, upset. The Smith government responded by putting out some guidelines because apparently the librarians can't figure out that putting that sort of thing in front of children isn't appropriate, which upset the Edmonton School Board. And this is where we got to get to the truth, because they keep calling it, the legacy media keeps calling it Smith's book ban, Daniel Smith's banning books. No, she isn't. She's banning porn. The left-wing lunatics of the Edmonton Public School Board, though, took her guidelines and ridiculously applied them to a bunch of classics to make a political stunt out of it and make it sound like Daniel Smith is banning classic books like 1984 or The Great Gatsby, or of course Margaret Atwood's book, which she responded to, which I suspect was all set up. It's all the usual Daniel Smith is evil all the time approach from legacy media. Not in this case. She's on the side of right, but now she's backed off to give even more specific directions, I guess, to this school board, because they don't know how to distinguish whether Great Gatsby is appropriate or two men sucking each other off in a picture are appropriate. That's really what it comes down to. Get out and vote, guys. Get rid of these school boards. But this is the headlines you're getting. This is the news you're getting. What we also need is a voucher system. That would fix things. Let's split these schools up. Let parents shop around school by school. and pick where their children are going to go and where the funding will follow them. I suspect schools that actually want children to come into their institutions will get the porn off the shelves. What else we got? Here's a CBC headline, the state broadcaster, $1.4 billion a year for this. This is a headline right out of them. I'm going to read it verbatim. Florida is ending vaccine mandates. What do Canadian travelers need to know? It says doctor warns against sheer unadulterated craziness in U.S. The vaccine mandates have ended just about everywhere. But it's just another excuse to take a shot at Florida. Make people afraid. Oh, my Lord, I'm going to go to Florida and catch something. Like, what? What mandates are there here now? What passports and all that crap? But that's the state broadcaster for you. That's the news they're giving you today. But that's because they're answering to Mark Carney, and they want to keep that anti-American attitude going. And hey, we've got some grievances with the United States. There's no doubt about that. But feeding the fires with ridiculousness like this, and then we have to pay $1.4 billion a year to do that. Pretty sad. Speaking of another area that didn't get much coverage from the legacy media, of course, but our Attorney General Sean Fraser. Let's give a little bit of background on this man. This is the guy, he's the douchebag who said only about a year ago that he's not going to run for office again because he wanted to spend more time with his family. Well, apparently he really doesn't like his family, because once some poor soul went and took that spot in a nomination and was going to run for the Liberals, but the polls started to turn around, and Sean decided he didn't like his family anymore and jumped back in and ran. It says a lot about the voters, too, though, who would vote for such a crass political opportunist, because they put him back in and he won his seat and he went back into cabinet. There's that other reminder. This is the Trudeau government with a different coat of paint, guys. Carney hasn't changed anything, but he has changed his role. He was a housing minister before, Sean Fraser, and a terrible one, as we saw. Total failure. So what do we do? Give him Attorney General. What could he screw up there, right? Yeah, so he came out with, because Poilievre was talking about self-defense in homes, which we should have the right to, and we do. That's another thing. Actually, right in the Standard, I wrote a column on that. We do have the right to self-defense. They don't like you to know it. Either way, he said, this isn't the Wild West. This is Canada. Good timing, Mr. Fraser. Right after that, let's see, last Sunday, Abdul Aleem Faruqi was shot to death in his house in front of his children by people coming in to rob him in the night. Wild West, indeed. Innocent homeowner in front of his children murdered. But heaven help if he'd defended himself, right? This isn't the Wild West. Can't have that. Well, he paid a good price for that. On the same day, in Welland, Ontario, 25-year-old Daniel Senecal. Keep that in mind when we're getting back to that Gladio thing I was talking about. Appears he broke into a different house. He sexually abused a toddler, hospitalized the little child. But he had been released in March for doing the same thing. He identifies as trans, by the way, and has some Indigenous background in him. So, he was released in March. Why do you think so? Because he identified as a she, her, and had Indigenous heritage. So we've got a Gladio report. Now it's led to a toddler being assaulted. Not good. Not good. These happen, though, just after our Attorney General tells us not to defend our homes. That's what he told us. It is crazy Wild West to want to do that. I'm certain that Abdul wishes he'd gotten up and defended his home. I'm certain his family wishes he'd gotten up and defended his home. Instead, he's dead. And I'm certain that the parents of that toddler who got raped, and of course the toddler itself, wished that somebody had gotten up and defended that home. Because the police didn't do it. Well, they couldn't. They can't be everywhere. I've got issues with the police, but that's where we get to. We've got to have the right to defend ourselves. In fact, we've got to be encouraged to. Let's see some of the other news. Canada's unemployment's up to 7.1%. Yes, Carney's doing a bang-up job, isn't he? Though, it's brought up a discussion. And Poilievre has been talking about that, temporary foreign workers and immigration in general. And it's true, if people are having trouble finding jobs, why are we still bringing in so many immigrants right now, particularly temporary foreign ones? I had other discussions. I did another video on that. Now, we can't just go out with a hacksaw or a chainsaw, I should say, or anything like that. There's certain areas where it still does apply better. But in general, that program needs to be reined in, including immigration. But why does this government, they talk a big game, but they never actually cut anything with immigration? Well, they've set some caps, actually, I should say, with students and that. So fair enough. Credit where due. But why do they fight the immigration so much? Because it gives them the only positive number economically that they can point at to pretend that they're doing a good job. Trudeau's been doing that for a decade. Because if you keep pumping people into the country, the GDP goes up a little bit. The problem is, with more people splitting that GDP, we get less per capita. And that's why we're like 30% poorer than the United States in general, or more GDP per capita, because they've been pumping it in like that. Well, our GDP is now going down even. So even the mass immigration isn't enough to keep it going. It's down 1.6%. That's coming right into recession territory. Chances are we're probably actually in a recession. But getting back to legacy media, we don't want to say anything that might paint Carney in a bad light, so they're not going to say it. They're not going to make that call yet. And I know economists will differ. Oh, it has to be this particular amount of decline over this amount of time. But they're still continuing with stupid economic policy. So Mark Carney had a big press conference today. Talk about word salad. Boy, much like Trudeau, I mean, it's just different intonation, but the same lack of commitment or any real changes going on with it. Well, one of the things he said, he's going to pause the electric vehicle mandate. He's going to pause it one more year. Still leaves the manufacturers and the car dealers screwed. He had no choice, because otherwise they're going to be fining and putting car dealers out of business and auto manufacturers who were already screwed with the trade war going on, because they would have had to go up to like 20% EV sales by next year, which is absolutely impossible. They aren't even vainly close. But with one more year, they're not going to be close either. But still, this economic genius of Mark Carney, you think one more year of instability is going to bring in more investment and help the economy? Of course not. But, what are you going to do here? It's getting back onto Carney back and forth with things, because his big grand plan, we're going to streamline federal projects, right? Mark Carney, the economic genius, he's going to get it done. We're going to get things fast-tracked. But then he goes along, but of course, we've got to get permission from every native across the country in order to do it. He always gives a caveat to everything he's going to do. But the environment minister, so it's kind of back and forth with this government. She came out and said the law does not require a cabinet to win approval from Indigenous groups before greenlighting major nation-building projects. I was happy to hear that from her, but it is counter to Mark Carney. But guys, you got to grow some knackers, because nothing's going to get done until you clarify that and stand on that. Because if you're going to keep saying you need consensus, in other words, nothing will get done. And our recession that's budding will deepen. You get a little local, and this will happen in every city anyways. Jody Gondek, the worst mayor in Calgary history, probably. It's some of the lowest numbers ever in incumbent mayor history, yet she still might win because 4 other conservatives are running against her. But now she's come up and she's running again, and she said she's going to take on crime in Calgary. She's going to take on the public disorder and the open drug consumption. She fought against the province adding sheriffs to clean up transit. She fought against all efforts to end this social disorder. Gondek isn't going to fix a damn thing. She's had 4 years of complete failure on this file. But there's how politicians, we've shown it in Canada. We've shown it with the Liberals. Maybe she's right. Maybe she's going to get reelected. You just got to pretend you're somebody else, and the voters forget. Well, keep watching your news, guys. Into the world of the woke. Speaking of municipal politics, speaking of lunatics, keep getting reelected. Here we go. Toronto's Office of the Integrity Commissioner. They've introduced an African ancestry declaration in its staff email signatures. This one's a beauty. This is friggin' awesome. So every employee in that department, at the end of their email, it says, though I am not a person of African descent, I'm committed to continually acting in support of and in solidarity with Black communities seeking freedom and reparative justice in light of the history and ongoing legacy of slavery that continues to impact Black communities in Canada. What? Canada's never had friggin' slaves. Oh, I know. I went through that discussion on X. And people said, oh, back in the 1700s, that wasn't Canada, you clowns. Oh, and some Indigenous people had slaves. Actually, they did. But either way, we're talking about the contemporary Canada, the people who were here. We didn't have any. And not a single person in Canada is a surviving slave from the American slavery days. Because this says, ongoing legacy of slavery impacting us. Oh, give me a break. And these Black communities seeking freedom. What freedom is any Black community lacking in Canada? You guys are insane, but that's where your tax dollars go. The Western Standard are the ones who reported on that, by the way. You can rest assured the CBC isn't going to write on that. I mean, think of this idiocy going on. UBC, a lot of tax dollars going into them. And what are they going to? This one's good. In their email closings, they identify themselves as unwelcome guests on unceded land. That's what it's down to now. You're an unwelcome guest on your own property, on your own land, in your own areas. This is woke madness, and this is your tax dollars at work. If you think you're an uninvited guest, I should say. Sorry, uninvited. You weren't invited. I don't need your invitation. I was born here. Let's get realistic with some things. And I'm not on somebody else's territory. I'm on permanently ceded territory. I know how to read a treaty. Remember, the news is never going to report these things in that sort of realistic way, and that's why I want to clear through this. Now, lunacy, by the way, if you feel uninvited, get the hell out. Get out. Go somewhere else. Don't sit there staring at your shoes. I'm uninvited on unceded land. Well, get the hell out. Well, if you're not going to, then shut up. You obviously don't mean anything. You're just giving platitudes, right? Right-wing insanity, it happens as well. Queen of Canada. And I don't know if she's right-wing or whatever the heck she is. She's a Filipino heritage, Romana Didulo, but some crazed anti-vax types. When you get to the far fringe of that, sovereign person kooks and so on, they joined her little cult, and they've been kind of active in southern Saskatchewan, terrorizing this poor village for quite some time. She's actually been arrested, and she's going to be seen for bail on Monday. I think it's interesting with her. Okay, she's a nutcase. That's clear as day. But I guess it's not that nature of cults. I don't get it. The crazier they are, the more people seem to want to follow them. Either way, she's gone into jail. It'll be interesting to see those bail hearings. I hope there's some reports on it, but it'll be out in bail hearings on Monday. I guess we'll see what happens, see if it's interesting. But either way, that's a weekly rundown of some of the news, guys, just to give you kind of a recap on one crazy week. I'm going to keep doing these updates just to cut through the BS for the news. Like and subscribe if you want, look for those alerts. I'm going to kind of regularly do these. I get downtime in the car. It's a good time to get the rant out and, spare you the legacy media, the crap on talk radio and the rest. I'll tell you what you need to think on these issues. Right on. Thanks. See you on the next one.